Who are the Mariners standouts so far in spring training? Plus, should they start Ben Williamson at third base on opening day? That's all coming up on this episode of Bleav in Mariners. What is up, sports fans? What is up, Mariners fans? Well, it is fully on. Not new anymore. The Seattle Mariners kicking off their second full week of spring training with a nice win in style over the Cleveland Guardians. 7-2 the final, the Mariners' fifth win of the spring. Yeah, wins don't matter, but it's at least nice to see, although that win coming on a pretty cloudy Arizona day, almost reminding me of a spring in Seattle, so to speak. A nice overcast and cool day, a slight breeze in the air. Makes me kind of feel like I'm at home right now. If I open my window, I'd probably feel that nice slight breeze. And that is where I am here taping this latest episode of Bleav in Mariners. Welcome on in. I'm Jordon Schultz, more affectionately known as Schultzy, a Pacific Northwest talk show host from Portland, Oregon. Really appreciate everybody that has checked out this new podcast called Bleav in Mariners. Started at the end of last season and really excited to get into it more as we go further into the 2025 season. We're up to 75 subscribers on YouTube. Really appreciate that. We've got a giveaway set for when we hit 100 subscribers on YouTube and 100 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts. And when we do hit 100 on YouTube, we're going to give away this 2019 Andres Munoz Topps Chrome Rookie Auto Card. Excited to give that away to a fellow Mariners fan. And then the big one, once we hit 100 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts, excited to give somebody this 2019 Edgar Martinez autographed Topps Transcendent card numbered to 25. So really appreciate everybody, like I said, that's new. All you new listeners or listeners that were holdovers from late last season. I know that there is a few of you. Really appreciate it and appreciate you helping me get to or closer to the 100 subscribers and 100 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts. When we get there, I'll let you know what we'll do as far as a giveaway. We'll probably do like a live stream. You can watch me drink beer during a game and get mad if the Mariners lose. It'll be fun. And yeah, this overcast weather, it is so nice to see maybe down in Peoria a little bit, because it reminds me not only of living here in the Pacific Northwest, but it reminds me that, hey, I just bought my tickets for opening day, March 27th against the Athletics. Super stoked to be there for game one of 2025. And it's going to be awesome to try and get up close and personal with the team, try to get to know some of you awesome Mariners fans out there as well, some other Mariners content creators. So excited for that. But there are still questions as to who we will be seeing on the roster on that opening day for the Seattle Mariners. So wanted to take this episode of Bleav in Mariners, dive into a couple of the standout performances of the spring and debate whether or not one of those could come out of nowhere and play his way onto the team. I think it is very possible. So quickly, we'll just kind of highlight some ups and downs so far that I've seen from players. How are the Mariners looking going into their second week of spring training? You know, the team as a whole, of course, we've mentioned it. They look loose. They're having fun. I mean, they seem to be playing in a much more free, enjoyable way out there as opposed to spring training last season and early last season. I think I can contribute that to, you know, being under Dan Wilson's rule, being under his thumb. Seems to be a little bit more lax around the clubhouse, a little bit more lax around the facilities down in Peoria. So really nice to see that. And we've discussed how awesome it is to have that chill, but still ready to go to war atmosphere that Dan Wilson can provide in the clubhouse. And hell, if you, I think, listen back like 2 or 3 episodes on Bleav in Mariners is when we mentioned it last. But what about guys individually? Of course, there have been some underwhelming performances. Dylan Moore, you know, not really doing much so far at the plate. He's gone hitless in spring training. Not what he's paid to do, but it is kind of frustrating to see that from a guy that's supposed to be your everyday second baseman, right? Moving Jorge Polanco over to third. And speaking of which, it took until the day that I taped this podcast, which was when the Mariners beat the Guardians 7-2, that we even saw Jorge Polanco getting in to any game action at all. And it was a designated hitter. And Mike Salk said this as well in a great article that he did for Seattle Sports. But it's pretty ironic that it took, a week and a half for him into spring training to get into the lineup, not even as a third baseman, but as a DH, despite coming in as the quote-unquote healthiest he's ever been. So I don't know. I might be throwing a little bit of steam on that storyline but not quite sure. We are only one game into the Jorge Polanco third base experiment in spring training here in Seattle. JP Crawford, he's only hitting slightly above the Mendoza line. I mean, you obviously need to see him pick it up a bit. Randy Arozarena had a quiet spring at the plate, but see, he still has a couple of hits, just like JP Crawford does. Julio Rodriguez hasn't really had a great average so far, batting in like the 150s, 160s, I think, but he is hitting the ball hard, and he does seem to be comfortable, seems to be confident. We're talking about that free and loose approach with the Mariners. That is definitely what Julio seems to be giving off the vibe of, and that is a vastly different Julio compared to last spring. Speaking of Mike Salk from Seattle Sports, he actually asked a great question in that same article that I just referenced, wondering that if the comfort that Julio's feeling, if that free approach and just a different feel to this locker room as opposed to 2024, if that would allow Julio to unleash that full edginess that we've kind of seen is just kind of there creeping up to the surface a little bit. But now that he's maybe growing into himself a little bit more, now that the locker room has a very fun atmosphere as compared to a couple of years before, you wonder if the full side of his edginess can come out and we can see that. And that can kind of, along with his growth into a superstar role, lead him to that bounce back season we're all banking on. And frankly, I think if that does happen, if that bounce back happens, it's going to be because of that edginess that Mike Salk was talking about in that article. And I think with what we're seeing from Julio, yeah, the results as far as hits aren't necessarily there, but he's been hitting the ball hard and he's been playing free and loose. Another guy hitting the ball hard and actually seeing some success as of late, Victor Robles. He's come on strong in the last few games. Even an amazing catch to rob a hit on Monday against the Guardians out in center field, like right up against the wall. Almost dropped it, but held on to it as he was falling down and hitting the wall. What a catch by Victor Robles, as well as a couple of hard hit balls in that game. Logan Gilbert looking way more like himself. Luis Castillo giving up another solo home run in their game against the Guardians, but I would say Luis is looking like Luis Castillo. They look like themselves, he and Logan Gilbert do. Tyler Locklear, he's been hitting the ball okay. Hasn't made much noise, though. Austin Shenton seems to be seeing the ball well. He had a walk and a run scored today, the day that I'm taping this podcast. Dominic Canzone, somebody that I'm actually pretty impressed with in spring training, was somebody I've been kind of down on, but he has been hitting the ball really hard. A lot of success to show for it with those hard hits as well. He's hitting about 300 with a couple of very loud doubles. And those huge glasses that we're all seeing, I don't know if you've actually seen Dominic Canzone on the field yet or seen any pictures of him on Twitter, but like we're seeing some massive glasses that he's wearing working out, or so far it seems for Dominic Canzone. So really cool to see those hard hitting balls. And I believe he had a couple of hard hit balls last season at times. It just wasn't really successful for him. So nice to see that he actually is getting something to show for it with hits, at least in spring training. Ryan Bliss, he's been competing for at-bats at second base. I think he's looked great so far. He's showing the Mariners how they would fare with his speed in the lineup. And trust me, it looks a lot better with his speed in the lineup, in my opinion. And I'll go on to tell you why here today and in a couple of episodes here on Bleav In Mariners. Of course, the Mitches, especially Mitch Garver, he was hitting at 500 at one point. I think he went 0 for 2 or 3 in that game against the Guardians, which, I mean, gosh, you can't hit 1,000, right? But it's good to see Garv Sauce swinging the bat freely. Good to see him hitting the ball hard. And that is desperately needed for the Mariners to succeed. But there is one guy in particular for the Mariners that has been on the minds of a lot of fans, and actually kind of a shocking name, somebody that we really weren't talking about in the offseason and really to start spring training. But this is somebody that we're going to now spend the rest of the podcast talking about. So you'll get to know him, even though you didn't know him at the beginning of spring training. And that would be third baseman Ben Williamson. Should the Seattle Mariners start Ben Williamson at third base and move Jorge Polanco back to second? That has been a question in a lot of Mariners fans' minds as of late. Been talking about highlighting Ryan Bliss and why he should start at second base coming up here on the podcast. Just mentioning that, and I still will. I still plan to do that. I love me some Ryan Bliss. But there is a much bigger dark horse here in Ben Williamson that everybody seems to be talking about in the last few weeks. 24-year-old kid, and he has made some noise this spring training. 3 for 8 so far. notching a triple, 2 singles, got a couple of ribbies or 3 RBIs, excuse me, drew a walk and got hit by a pitch on Monday against the Guardians as well. So obviously didn't get any more hits, but showed that he actually has a handle on the zone. On top of that, he's had some really nice defensive plays. I mean, it already, you kind of see him out in the field. It already looks like he's got a polished glove, a pretty elite MLB level glove at the hot corner, and he throws it really hard to first. That dart arm at third base, what you need as well. It kind of makes you feel like, oh, if he's playing third base, it's all sewn up. There ain't nothing getting into left field. It's pretty much going to be an out like 99% of the time if Williamson's in the area. So, yeah, really nice play at second base as well. A second-round pick back in 2023. I mean, as a 4-year guy from Williams and Mary, so full college kid. He actually had the time to develop at the college level. It's not surprising to me that he's already making an impact, even though he's a non-roster invitee, 18 months or so after he was drafted into the big leagues. I mean, he played like 12 or 13 games in that season after he was drafted in 2023, and then in 2024 spending some time at multiple levels, but spending most of his time with Double-A Arkansas. And he really did have a pretty good time down there. 283, 34 doubles, 64 RBIs over the entire year at Single-A and Double-A. The one concern, though, there is one thing. It looks like Ben Williamson, he's got double power. He can hit the ball in the gap. He can get the bat on the ball. He's actually competent with the strike zone. He can hit in clutch situations. There are a lot of positives about Ben Williamson. He's got some gap power, but there is some legitimate, like, true power concern with Williamson. He only hit 4 total home runs last season, so you kind of wonder if that is going to keep the Mariners from installing him immediately. I know that they are based around, a team that needs just doubles. They need guys to steal bases. They don't necessarily want a bunch of guys to hit a bunch of homers. That's just not the way that they designed their team. But they do need some power in traditional power spots, right? And third base, yeah, you traditionally get some home runs. So there is that concern with Williamson, and you wonder exactly how the Mariners would handle that going forward in about 3 weeks going into the regular season. I mean, Jorge is going to play either way. So essentially, you got to look back at this like Ben Williamson having a great spring so far, looking like he's almost big league ready or is big league ready. But you got Jorge Polanco that was just signed to a $7 million deal plus incentives that's going to play either way. So you're basically looking at this as coming down to either Ryan Bliss, at least in my opinion, or Ben Williamson getting at bats. And even if the other one can push Dylan Moore, or even if one or the other, can push Dylan Moore back to utility spot, you still can't keep both. You just don't have enough at bats in the lineup. You signed Donovan Solano. He actually got a couple of starts over the weekend at third base as the team still awaits the availability in the field of Jorge Polanco. Leo Rivas, he hasn't really been healthy enough to make a case for many at bats in spring training once the season starts. So basically, you've got a 3-man competition between Ben Williamson and Ryan Bliss, as well as top prospect Cole Young. I mean, Young, he's looked really good at the plate, gotten a couple of hits, but unfortunately, we haven't seen him much in the field, and I'm assuming that he's not most likely, because he hasn't been playing as much in the field, most likely not going to shock the world and make the opening day roster. I think the Mariners would want him to play a little bit more. We'll most likely see him at some point in Seattle this season, but would want him to play a little bit more at the AAA level and develop with some seasoning or whatever the hell they would want to call it before they actually call him up to the big league roster. So yeah, it is truly down to Williamson versus Bliss. And we were just talking about maybe a lack of power there for Ben Williamson. And that's not necessarily taken up for by Ryan Bliss, or made up for, by Ryan Bliss. But Ryan Bliss has a lot more speed than Ben Williamson does. And Bliss has had a great spring training, like I was mentioning earlier in the podcast. He's hitting 308. He's got a couple of doubles. He's got a triple. It was an RBI triple as well. He's got 2 total RBIs over the spring so far and a stolen base. And so essentially you're looking at 2 young players that both look fairly seasoned, and Ben Williamson making the case that nobody really thought that he would make to be on this team out of spring training to start the regular season. But is it Ben Williamson's time yet? I don't think so. at least to start the year. I mean, I love this kid. This kid looks like a major league ready player, right? Or at least just super close. But it's just the Mariners' philosophy. It sucks, y'all. There's too much money. It's a sad thing to say, but it's the world we're living in, rooting for the Seattle Mariners. So say it with me. It just it pains you to be a Mariners fan at this point, but there's too much money invested. Say it with me. Too much money, even though it's $7 million invested in Jorge Polanco for the Mariners to not give him at bats as an everyday player. So you got to make sure that you're giving him those at bats because you paid him, and either put him at third base or put him at second. And I guess if you said, okay, well, we'll keep Jorge and we're going to choose Ben Williamson and we're going to let Dylan Moore be our utility guy instead of maybe a combo of Dylan Moore and Ryan Bliss, and Dylan Moore with, the ability to play every position makes the Mariners much more comfortable with him in that role. Of course, that would push Ryan Bliss down to AAA. But to me, like I just said, to me, Ryan Bliss, I think he is much more important to the Mariners lineup than Ben Williamson at this point. His style of play fits more into what Seattle wants to do. They built their offense on keeping that simple approach. They want to use their speed. They want to use the big parts of the ballpark. And Ryan Bliss does that perfectly for you, at least in my opinion. He's so fast. He can use the whole field with his swing. I love watching him at the plate. I love the way he can keep the big part of the bat in the zone for as long as possible. That's obviously an approach that successful players have, and it allows him to hit the ball, maybe even control a little bit more of where the ball goes or hit the ball where he wants to send it. It allows for him to have a much better season, much better at bats when you leave that thick part of the bat in the zone for longer. If you can do that as a Major League Baseball player, you're going to be successful. And I think the fact that he can do that and that he is as fast as he is, I think the Mariners need to reward him with 300 to 400 plus at bats and see what he can do. If he flames out, or say Jorge Polanco had such a bad start that you can't ignore it, I wouldn't be surprised if the Mariners turned to Ben Williamson at that point. Like I said, he's proven himself, other than the homers, of course, but in the minors, he's proven himself in big league camp so far this season. And I'm assuming, even with that question of power, Kevin Seitzer, Edgar Martinez would love a project like Ben Williamson to help him increase those power numbers. But I would bet a lot of money that in some point in 2024, we're going to see Ben Williamson on the Major League roster for the Seattle Mariners. It's just most likely not going to be to open the 2025 season. And hey, guys, we're talking about like how freakish all these prospects look for the Seattle Mariners. We're talking about the number of high-level prospects that the Mariners have. I mean, I think of years past where the Mariners had like some up-and-comers coming up at the same time, or like a big name like Dustin Ackley. And then I remember like Kyle Seager, like the lesser known name that ended up succeeding while everyone was focusing on Dustin Ackley. Could Williamson be the lesser known name that ends up doing better than like a Cole Young? I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but what I'm saying is don't count a guy like Ben Williamson out. Now, the key difference here, and I don't think that Cole Young's going to have a career like Dustin Ackley. The key difference here, and one that I think signals a much more successful approach at drafting and developing talent for Seattle, is that these young guys, 19 to 21 to 22, unlike Dustin Ackley back in the day, unlike Jeff Clement back in the day, these 19 to 22-year-old prospects, they already look like grown men. Yeah, Cole Young, I mean, I know he's kind of more of a second base like body type. He's a 5'10", 180, 190 guy, but he looks like a dude. To quote a coworker of mine here in Portland, former Oregon Duck and NFL player Anthony Newman. And you can add like 5 or 6 other guys to the list of dudes that the Seattle Mariners organization has. Colt Emerson, Celestin, Johnny Farmelo, Lazaro Montez, obviously a dude. And yeah, Ben Williamson, not necessarily initially included in that group. At the end of last offseason, you heard the front office saying that he could be a name that was going to be getting some play, that was going to be getting a look here in spring training. But fans weren't necessarily expecting much out of him. But who knows? Maybe the lesser heralded Williamson ending up better than every single one of these other players. Wouldn't that be something? But let me know either on Twitter at On The Air Jordan with an O, or here in this YouTube video of episode 22 of Bleav in Mariners. who you think is going to end up on the opening day roster for your Seattle Mariners. Send me your thoughts. And I would love to talk to you about anywhere that you think the Mariners might lean, or a player that you've been watching all spring training and you're super high on. You've got a theory about a specific player and how well they fit with this offense this year. I'd love to talk about it, and maybe we can make it into an episode here on Bleav in Mariners. And that is going to do it for this episode of Bleav in Mariners. Next up, I do want to look at a theory of my own about the Mariners offense that no one has really talked about. We'll also take a look at the starting pitching staff. Dove into the bullpen a couple episodes ago. Now I got to dive further into the rest of the team. And coming up next will be the pitching staff. And I will get further into why I think Ryan Bliss needs to be the starting second baseman for the Mariners on opening day. Make sure you give the podcast a 5-star rating or review, or subscribe to the channel and like the video if you're watching on YouTube. And make sure, stick around. I will be letting people know when we're giving away this Edgar Martinez Topps Transcendent autograph card and this Andres Munoz rookie autograph card once we hit 100 subs on YouTube and 100 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts. Enjoy spring training, Mariners fans, and keep those tridents up. See you soon.